Hello, good people of the world. We are back. We were not supposed to be gone in the first place, but then again, we had to for some reasons. Now, if you check out the channel, the name has changed. What we do hasn't. We're the same people doing the same thing. The name this time around might be easier for you to remember and also subscribe to the channel. So it should make things easier. Regardless, the topic for this video is RTX 5000 series and whatever Nvidia announced at the CES keynote. Okay, so there are a lot of things to talk about for graphics cards and some technologies and some confusing things as well. So we'll just start with the graphics cards, compare the specs with the previous generation, and then move along. So the first card that I'd like to talk about is the 5090, of course. As you can see, we have the specifications on the screen. RTX 4090, 16,384 CUDA cores and 21,760 for the RTX 1590. Now for the shader cores, I do not have the specs. For tensor cores, we go from 1321 AI tops to 3352. For ray tracing, we go from 191 to 318 teraflops. Now, these specs are not linearly comparable because again, architecture is different, generation is different. So, but then again, this should give us an idea about the improvement over the previous gen, at least in terms of raw specs. So let's move on to the base clock. The base clock for the 5090 has actually regressed a little from 2.23 base clock to 2.01 and from 2.52 boost to 2.41. Memory configuration has also changed, 24 gigs of GDDR6X on the 4090, 32 gigs of GDDR7 on the 5090. Interface width has also changed, 384-bit to 512, and this is the major part here, 450 watts to 570 watts, and this is the total graphics power. Now 450 watts on the 4090 was already borderline because on some partner cards it would easily go over 500 watts. Now on the reference card we have 575. So this is going to change some things and may even prompt a power supply change. But then again, if you got an RTX 4090, you probably got something around 1200 or 1500 watts. In terms of price, the RTX 4090 currently retails in India for around 1,58,000 rupees. And these are reference prices for the reference models. In terms of partner cards, the prices are all over the place, so we won't be able to compare that. But for a linear comparison, these are reference prices from Nvidia's website. 1,58,000 for the 4090 and 2,14,000 for the 5090. So with the partner cards of RTX 4090 already retailing over 2 lakhs, I'm not sure where 5090 is going to go. Now this is more or less it. I'll show you the benchmarks for it. Now these are first party benchmarks from Nvidia and they're a little hard to read as well, but then again, I'll try to do my best to explain it. So the gray bar here is the RTX 4090, and on this particular scale, all of them are at 1x. Then we move on to the green bar of the 5090, and that shows you the relative performance. If you take a look at Cyberpunk 2077, Alan Wake 2, Black Myth Wukong, 2x or more than that. But this is with DLSS4 and Frame-Gen on. We'll talk about that later in the video. But in terms of raw rasterization performance, this is more or less it. With ray tracing, Far Cry 6, 1x for the 4090 and around 1.2, 1.3x for the 5090. So the improvement is not as much as they're making it seem like. All right. So before we move on to the next card, which is the 5080, I would also like to talk about something peculiar that I noticed. Now this is from the CES keynote. Jensen here, Captain Jensen, is holding an RTX 5090 and a bare PCB of it. Now this is supposed to be the RTX Blackwell die, and it says 4000 AI tops, and these are specs that I've pulled for the RTX 5090 from Nvidia's own website, and this says 3352 AI tops, which is quite a bit less. Again, for ray tracing, 380 teraflops, and here we have 318 teraflops. So again, a major reduction here. So what I think is going on here is that this is the full die, but the RTX 5090 is a flagship for now. So they may have plans to introduce a 5090 Ti or probably a Titan card like before. But again, this is just a speculation from my end. This could be an enterprise chip or whatever else. So I'm not really sure, but I can speculate that there may be a flagship over the 5090 as well, a Ti or a Titan. So that is the story of the RTX 5090. Now let us move on to the next card, which is 5080. These are the benchmark charts. So here are the specifications. Now, RTX 4080, 9728 CUDA cores to 10752, 780 AI tops to 1801, 113 teraflops ray tracing to 171, 2.21 to 2.3 base clock, which is improved, 2.51 to 2.62, again an improvement. Memory, 16 gigs of GDDR6X to 16 gigs of GDDR7. The interface width remains the same, and the total graphics power, it goes up from 320 watts to 360 watts. Okay, now before we talk about the price, I would also like to discuss something else. I would like to get the benchmarks out of the way, although they're more or less the same. Again, it's the same story here with DLSS4 and Frame-Gen, 2x or over 2x, but a raw rasterization with ray tracing, Far Cry 6, around 1.3x, 1.2x. Now, why I wanted to leave the price on the table for a discussion later. Now, this is the comparison between the 5080 and the 4080, but you introduce a 4080 Super and the gains start to diminish. Now, from 10 to 40 CUDA cores to 10752, 836 AI tops to 1801, 121 teraflops to 1.71, 2.29 to 2.23 base clock, 2.55 to 2.62 boost clock. The memory width and everything else remains the same. Now, again, these are reference prices from NVIDIA's own website. RTX 5080 is supposed to be retailing at 1,07,000 when it launches. But again, the partner cards will be priced higher. This is just a reference price for the Founders Edition. And for the 4080 Super is 1,05,000. Now, this, when you just look at the specs, the improvements do not seem very prominent, and considering that in the benchmark charts the 5080 and 4080 were compared and the performance bump was around 1.2 1.3x, so that is going to diminish even more when you compare it to the 4080 Super, which is around the same price as the 5080 right now, and it might go down as well because 5080 is going to be a newer card and it is going to be priced higher, so the 4080 Super may drop in price as well. Now, this price thing and with the super cards, this is going to continue with the rest of the cards as well. We start with the 5070 Ti, you compare the specs. 7680 CUDA cores to 8960, 641 AI tops to 1406, 93 teraflops to 133 teraflops, 2.31, 2.3, there's a regression here, 2.61 to 2.5, again, a regression here. 4070 Ti had 12 gigs of GDDR6X, 5070 Ti gets 16 gigs of GDDR7. The bus width also increases 192 bit to 256 bits, 285 watt to 300 watt. That is just an increment of 15 watts, which is, makes the 5070 Ti looks really good. Again, before we talk about the price, let us check out the benchmarks for the 5070 Ti. The same thing, with DLSS and Frame-Gen 4, 2x or more than that, with Far Cry around 1.2, 1.3. And this is going to diminish again when you compare it to the Super variant, which we are going to do right here. Okay, so we introduce the 4072 Ti Super to the equation and things change a little. 8448 CUDA cores to 8960, 706 AI tops to 1406, 102 teraflops ray tracing to 133 teraflops. 2.34 to 2.3, there's a regression here. 2.61 to 2.45, there's a regression here as well. 16 gigs of GDDR6X to 16 gigs of GDDR7. Bus width remains the same. The power, again, it is comparable to the 4070 when you do that. Now, the 4070 Ti Super reference price on NVIDIA's website is 84,000 and 5070 Ti is 80,000. Now, if these prices, if the market sticks to these prices, the 5070 Ti looks all right. But, with the partner cards, the 5070 Ti is going to be probably more expensive than 80,000, and 4070 Ti Super might come down in prices. So again, and when you take this data back to the benchmark charts, let me just show you here, 5070 Ti. This generational gain is going to reduce a little more, which might make the 5070 Ti look not a very good proposition. Same story with the 5070. Let us move on. 4070 5888 CUDA cores to 6144, 466 AI tops to 988, 67 to 94 ray tracing, 1.92 to 2.16, 2.48 to 2.51. So there's an improvement here. In terms of the memory configuration, we have 12 gigs of GDDR6 or GDDR6X on the 4070 and 12 gigs of GDDR7 on 5070. Now, in terms of memory, 12 gigs may seem like a little less for a card of 5070 stature, but Nvidia has also promised a lot of technologies which is going to reduce the VRAM consumption. But let us see how that goes once the games are out, once the cards are out in the wild and they're being reviewed by people. Only then we'll be able to get a better idea of what is going on. Now the interface width remains the same at 192-bit. Power consumption has grown by 50 watts, 200 watts for the 4070 and 250 for the 5070. Again, before we go to the price, let us take a look at the almost repetitive benchmark tables. Now the performance gains here 1.2x, again 2x. This is with DLSS4 and Frame-Gen. This is what we are looking at, around 1.2x. Now you take that back, and in these terms, in these particular terms, when with the comparison with the super cards, the 5070 looks a little out of sorts. So 4070 Super sits at 7168 CUDA cores, 6144 for 5070. So there's actually a regression here. 568 AI tops to 988, 82 teraflops of ray tracing to 94, 1.98 to 2.16, 2.48 to 2.51. There are improvements here. 12 gigs of GDDR6X to GDDR7, 12 gigs. Bus width remains the same. The power consumption 220 watt compared to 250 watt. Now, there's actually a reduction in CUDA cores on the RTX 5070 when you compare it to the 4070 Super. Now, if you look at the price, the RTX 5070 for the reference card, the Founders Edition card, it is 59,000 rupees, which seems nominal if I'm being honest. But then again, once the cards are launched and the partner cards are launched, it is going to be probably pricier than this. Now, when you compare that to the price of the 4070 Super, it is 63,000. So the 4070 Super at this point seems pricier than the 5070. But then again, if you take these into consideration and then apply it to the performance charts, the benchmarks that we saw, the gains here, I don't think there's going to be a lot. So the promises of RTX 5070 offering 4090 performance, they seem a little far-fetched. And as Jensen also mentioned, it is, a lot of it is riding on AI. Now, I do not have a particular problem with that. It is all right. If it's a new technology, it is fine. If it is helping the card perform better, if it is. But still, when you say that a 5070 will provide you with performance that is that can be matched to a 4090, that is slightly misleading. Now, the whole hoopla, it all rides around DLSS4, and we'll get to that in a minute. Before that, I would also like to show you something. I would like to show you something cool. And here we have Jensen holding the RTX 5090, and it's a proper 2-slot card. It's a very small card. Now, this they probably were able to do because of this, the redesigned cooler. It has a full flow through. The PCB sits in the middle, and so I think they have a lot of confidence in the cooling to make a 2-slot card with the 5090, which is going to be 575 watts. If I remember it correctly. So this is a good thing, and hopefully the partner cards may be able to leverage this technology as well. I hope they do, or else we'll just continue to get 3 or even more than 3-slot cards. Now, this is all on the hardware part. Now let us talk about the DLSS4 and all the noise on the internet surrounding it. So what Frame-Gen does is that, prior to DLSS4, what used to happen was there was one rendered frame and then there was one generated frame. Yeah. So if your game is being rendered at 30 FPS with the generated frames, the output is going to be 60 FPS, which obviously is going to make it appear smoother. And since there's just one generated frame, latency was also not a big problem. I haven't heard a lot of issues with that. Now, there were some problems with, picture quality, the fidelity and all of that, but I'm not going to discuss that because the main problem with DLSS4, the problem that people have with it is the multi-frame gen technology. So what they're going to do is that for every rendered frame, there can be 3 there can be 3 additional generated frames. So if your game is being rendered at 30 fps, you might get up to 120 fps. Now this is going to make it, look smoother, obviously, but I'm not really sure how that is going to work out for latency. That is also going to depend on driver optimization and game optimization, but still, you know but then again, if I have to talk about my own stance on it, my personal stance on it, I am rather neutral about it, because the latency and everything, the DLSS4, and if someone is going to use it to that extent, you can manage. If you want those additional 3 frames, you can keep it at 2, you can keep it at 1. But most of the people who are going to be using this technology is for AAA titles with ray tracing at 4K. Now in those kind of games, I'm not really sure if latency is going to be a big problem, unless it makes the game experience choppy, it makes the inputs choppy. So again, we'll just have to wait once the cards are out and once people start to review them. Now obviously we won't be getting them because it's not such a big channel, and that is why you have to help us by liking the videos and subscribing. But let us come back to what I was talking about. So the problem with DLSS4 and Frame-Gen might not be as big a problem as it is being made out to be, but then again, the misleading bit is something that I'm concerned about, 5070 and 4090, comparing those two cards. Now for the people who play online games or competitive games, single player shooters and such, they get over 200 fps in most of the titles, even without DLSS. They can get rendered frames up to that speed, and then around those fps, around that fps, the limitation of the monitor's refresh rate also comes in. So if you have a 240 hertz monitor and if you're natively getting 240 hertz, there's no need to switch DLSS on or Frame-Gen on. And if you do that, then it's something that you've done to yourself if latency becomes a problem there. But in terms of AAA titles at 4K with ray tracing, I think it might make the experience smoother. But then again, it is going to depend on driver optimization, game optimization, and all of that. I would also like to mention that on the NVIDIA website, they told us that there are going to be 75 games that are going to support DLSS4 right away. And for the other games, for the older titles that do not, they are providing a DLSS override feature, which might enable you to use this feature on older titles as well. So this is a sort of a brief coverage of DLSS4. Now it is a complex topic, and there's also Reflex 2 to talk about. So we decided that we are probably going to do a different video on that, just discussing DLSS4, its pros and cons and all of that, and that is going to come later on the channel. Before that, we also have to discuss about the the RDNA4 GPUs and all of that. So there are going to be a fair few videos on the channel. So again, I would request you to subscribe and like the video if you like the content, so that we can also get cards from these manufacturers hands-on for a more hands-on review, because for now we just have to scour the internet, get the information, try to package it in a easier manner, which is easier for everyone to understand. So that's all we are doing at the moment, and we are going to have to continue to do that for a while. So subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next one.